Well, hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It's Brandon Gingelbach. I'm the president of the Fort Worth Chamber, and welcome to Leaders Online, our virtual learning platform. Today, we have the pleasure of having Senator Ted Cruz, who's going to join us. He is running a little bit late, as you can imagine and appreciate. He's got a variety of different phone calls and things that he's busy doing. So I know he's wrapping up a phone call at the moment, and so we didn't want to delay and going live late. So we're just gonna spend some time here and waiting for him to get on. I will at this time go ahead and pass along a couple of things that I was gonna mention at the end of the call regarding the Chamber of Commerce, just a few things. For those of you who didn't know, we launched a grant program this week. We launched it on Wednesday. It's called Protect the Fort, and it's in partnership with Facebook. And we were able to receive $250,000 in funding to be able to use towards small business grants, businesses of 25 employees or less. The grants are up to $5,000. And so if you go to protectthefort.com, you can apply. Applications are open until May 22nd. And this is a partnership that we have with the Metropolitan Black Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, Fort Worth, City of Fort Worth Economic Development, and Visit Fort Worth. So we're very excited about that. Also, if you haven't heard, we have an online forum that we've been able to launch this week. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the online forum because now we have the great Senator Ted Cruz on the phone with us, or on Zoom with us. Hello, Senator. Thanks so much for joining us. We got you on mute. Let's see if we can unmute. There we go.
All right, the joy of technology.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, we went ahead and started live. Knew you were wrapping up a phone call, so thanks so much. So as I was telling the viewers here, I'm really excited to hear from Senator Cruz today. He's going to provide a brief federal update as well as what he sees happening here in Texas. And we're going to be able to ask some questions that we've received ahead of time from some of you that have registered after a brief introduction. But let me introduce the senator. Throughout his life, Ted Cruz has proven to be a passionate and effective fighter for limited government, economic growth, and the Constitution. Ted's calling to public service has been inspired by firsthand observation of the pursuit of freedom and opportunity in America, foremost by his mother Eleanor and father Raphael. Senator Cruz holds degrees in public policy and law from Princeton University and Harvard Law School, respectively. He became a U.S. Senator in 2013 and currently serves on the Committee on Foreign Relations, the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the Committee on the Judiciary, just to name a few. Senator Cruz, thanks so much for being with us. Our favorite senator, we're so pleased to have you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be with you, and thank you everyone in Fort Worth for taking the time to be part of this call and maybe be part of this discussion. I wish I could be with you in person, but obviously these are unusual times, and so instead we use the wonders of technology to be there virtually instead. These are extraordinary times. In Texas, we are facing three simultaneous crises. Number one, we have a public health crisis. The global pandemic of coronavirus. It is deadly. It is easily transmissible. Worldwide, we have seen over 300,000 deaths that have come from this pandemic, and we are taking extraordinary steps to defeat it. We're taking extraordinary steps to slow the spread of the virus, to flatten the curve, and to protect human life. Number two, we're facing an economic crisis, and the level of this crisis is catastrophic. We've seen over 36 million Americans lose their jobs in the last 60 days. We have millions of small businesses all across the country on the verge of bankruptcy, and we're seeing a level of devastation this country has not seen since the Great Depression. And virtually all of these economic consequences are the direct result of government policies put in place to fight and defeat the pandemic. And then third, in Texas, we're dealing with yet another crisis, and that is a crisis an energy crisis, an oil and gas crisis, which is right in the middle of this pandemic. We saw Russia and Saudi Arabia take advantage of the crisis and try to destroy energy producers in the state of Texas. They made the decision, the cynical decision, to flood global oil markets and to try to drive down the price and drive out of business Texas energy producers. That has caused an historic drop in prices, including just recently dropping into the negative range, and for the first time in history, dropping to nearly negative $40 a barrel in terms of the May price options. That endangers millions of high-paying jobs in Texas and all across the country. I can tell you virtually every waking moment I have is being spent dealing with and focusing on our responses, marshaling our resources to all three of those crises. We need to defeat all three of them, and I believe we will, but it is going to be an enormous challenge for all of us to come through this. With that, let me open it up to questions. I'm sure we'll talk about the specific responses to each of those crises in the course of the question, so let's just open it up.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thanks, Senator. This is a question I get a lot, and I know you've heard it before, and that's how we balance the economy being shut down and people being quarantined with the reality of opening the economy back up and putting people at risk. So if we keep the economy shut down and people quarantined, fewer people will die, but the economy will suffer and vice versa. How do you balance saving lives from COVID-19 and opening back up the economy?
The shorter answer is we've got to do both, and we've got to exercise common sense. It's easy to embrace an extreme position on one side or the other, and I personally think that neither of the extreme positions are right. So many of our views today are deeply polarized and politicized just in the age of Trump, and so you see people's reactions being very different depending upon what they think of the president. Many of those who hate the president, their view is everything's got to be shut down. We must never reopen, it seems. That doesn't make any sense. There are some who love the president who take the other side's view of, oh, this is all made up and we need to reopen everything immediately. That's not right either. And the answer is more complicated. And I actually think most Texans understand how to utilize common sense and sound science and reason through challenging problems. Yes, we need to be proactive fighting this disease, preventing the spread of risk. That means taking common sense steps to prevent the spread of the virus, to slow the spread of the virus, to protect people. But at the same time, this economic catastrophe that we're seeing will have a very real cost in terms of human lives. I actually don't think it's right that it's only the public health side that has lives at stake. It's both sides of the ledger that have lives at stake. When you have 36 million people losing their jobs, when you have people's life savings being destroyed, when you have businesses that people have spent their lifetimes and sometimes multiple generations building, and all of that going up in smoke. If we keep going down that path, that is going to have a real public health consequence as well. We know we're going to see increased rates of mental illness, increased rates of depression, increased rates of suicide. We know we'll see increased rates of alcohol abuse and substance abuse. We also know, as we've seen, as people are driven by fear of the virus, that there are people who are not seeking medical care for other health ailments, whether heart disease or something else. Every one of those is going to cost lives and is going to have a very real and tragic consequence in terms of lives that are going to be lost. I think our objective should be to save and preserve life, and to do so to save as many lives as possible. That means we have to balance and value lives on both sides of the ledger. It also means that the particular policies put in place are going to vary geographically dependent on the facts on the ground. You look at New York City. What has played out there is horrifying. It's heartbreaking. And I don't think anyone in their right mind would argue that New Yorkers should go back to work tomorrow. At the same time, Thankfully, Texas, the rates of infection have been much, much lower. We've seen statewide about 1,200 fatalities in the state of Texas that have been linked to COVID-19. That's 1,200 too many. We grieve those losses. But out of a state of 29 million, those numbers are much, much lower than the devastation we're seeing. You know, more than half the fatalities in the country have occurred in New York and New Jersey. I think what Texas is doing makes sense, which is allowing businesses to reopen and doing so not just immediately willy-nilly, just like everything is back to normal, but doing so gradually, doing so with precautions, using PPE, using masks, using gloves, using social distancing. So for example, restaurants, right now, the statewide standard is that at restaurants you can reopen, but it's at 25% capacity. Heidi and I and the girls went out to eat a week ago. First time we'd been out to a restaurant in a couple of months. And it was great. We went out but we actually sat probably about 12 feet away from the next table. They had things really spread out. I think that makes sense. And I do think Texans are ready to get back to work. Texans are frustrated and we want to get back to work. We need to get back to work, but we need to do so in a way that also keeps people safe. And we got to do both.
Well, thanks for that. Another question we had, I think, and this is really relevant. We're having a lot of discussions about this in Fort Worth with Hamilton that was due to come to the wonderful Bass Hall here. Performing arts accounts for about 4.5% of GDP. Is there a plan to increase aid to these organizations?
Look, the impact on the arts is clearly significant. And if you throw in sort of any gatherings that have large public gatherings, so you throw in not just the arts, you throw in sports. I mean, the loss of sports for a whole lot of us, myself included, has been agonizing. I mean, every year I DVR every Rockets game, and that's what I watch when I get home is the latest Rockets game. I usually watch them a day or two behind schedule, which is an interesting, you got to have a media blackout not to know the result to get home and watch the DVR game. That is a big challenge. Anything involving large public gatherings. Hamilton is an incredible show. I took my daughter Caroline, just the two of us. It was a daddy-daughter trip to see Hamilton when it was in Houston. It was amazing. What a great show for also revisiting a love for the American founding and the extraordinary leaders that were the framers of our Constitution. The arts are a vibrant, critical part of our economy and of our life. We're seeing creativity in terms of how to preserve the arts in this time of crisis. Some of the creativity is using other tools we have. So my daughter does musical theater. She loves musical theater. So she was in a show. Tragically, the show was canceled. So she's doing online work through Zoom. I think we will see more and more of using technology to bring the arts to people, because that's part of how we as people express our creativity, express our life, whether it is writing or art or music. It is part of what it means to be human. That will preserve. Now, I don't think the answer is for Washington simply to be shoveling cash. We spent $3 trillion. That's $3 trillion we don't have. It's not like there's some secret vault where we have all this cash that we're able to just deploy it where needed. All of this is borrowed. We're borrowing it against our kids and grandkids. We're borrowing it from China. The volume of the spending is unprecedented. In fact, we have increased the national debt the most this year as a percentage that the United States ever has since 1943, since the height of World War II is the last time we had this kind of dramatic increase in debt. So I do think there is some caution. I don't think the answer is just keep writing checks on an account that we don't have anything in. I do believe we will see the arts survive and thrive. I think it's going to be a combination of personal philanthropy, private philanthropy, local communities coming together, supporting the arts. But I don't think at the end of the day, it's simply going to be borrowed money from Washington that is going to preserve the arts. The real solution is get the economy moving again. That as long as the economy is frozen in place, everything's a disaster. There's no money for anything else you look at until the economy moves. Remember, 3 months ago, the economy was booming and people had the resources to support the arts, to support all sorts of endeavors. We got to bring back the economy, and then everything else follows from that.
Yep. Thanks for that. Question we have here is how the federal government is prepared if there's a second round in the fall. Yep. I'm guessing when they say second round, they probably mean a second round of outbreak of COVID-19. And so from the federal government standpoint, are the right measures in place?
Yeah, I very much hope so. It is a good question. And then that's a very real possibility. One of the things I've discovered throughout the course of this pandemic is that the so-called experts don't really know what they're talking about. And then I don't mean that as a fault of them. This stuff's hard. We've never seen this pandemic before. And so early on when it was just starting, I know there was all sorts of projections, all sorts of conclusions that were stated categorically that have since proven to be false. I'll give you an example personally. You may recall back in March, early on, right when this pandemic was coming to the US, I ended up encountering 2 different individuals who tested positive for COVID-19. And I talked to the CDC at the time. I talked to the health director in Houston and Harris County where we live. And I asked them, what should I do? Because I had been one of them I'd shaken hands with and had been pretty close contact with. And the advice I got from every single doctor, epidemiologist I spoke to was, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to quarantine. And they all told me categorically, asymptomatic people cannot transmit coronavirus. That's what every single one of them told me. You may recall I ended up deciding to self-quarantine anyway. Even though the doctors were not telling me I needed to, I decided out of an abundance of caution, I was going to self-quarantine at home because I didn't want to be responsible for inadvertently getting someone else sick. And so I self-quarantined at home, ended up never getting sick. I stayed healthy, but it turned out what they told me, I mean, absolutely confidently, asymptomatic people can't transmit the virus, we now know is totally false. And many of the transmissions we're seeing are from asymptomatic people. That sort of phenomenon has played out throughout this process, where what the experts believe they know, later facts prove is not right. And so if you look at other viruses, you look at something like the flu, you often see a big seasonal uptick in the winter months. And then when it gets hot, when it's summertime, the numbers go way down. But then you see, and it's thunderstorming here in Houston, so that was lightning and thunder right outside. So special effects provided by God Almighty. You know, you often see then a seasonal increase in the fall. There are experts worried about that we may see the numbers spike as we get into the fall, as we get into cooler months. I hope that's not the case. But if it is, I will say the federal government and the state and local governments, I think, are leaning in pretty aggressively in terms of producing, in terms of stockpiling PPE, stockpiling masks and gloves and gowns and ventilators and test kits. So that I do think, and I've spoken with leaders throughout the federal government, throughout the state, local governments. I do think in the fall, if there is an uptick, we will have more tools to deal with it. But until we have a vaccine or cure, there's not going to be just a magic wand that makes it go away. The best we're going to do is slow the rate of transmission and hopefully get better at treating those who are sick.
Yep, thank you. So PPP, it's a big topic of conversation. And the question is, when can we expect to receive final rule on CARES Act PPP loan?
A great question. Treasury and Small Business Administration are moving forward with that. They are revising the rules going forward. The Paycheck Protection Program was a novel program, and it was something that we created as a way to get through this crisis. And I think it's important to understand the bills that Congress has passed so far. I don't refer to them as stimulus bills. They actually weren't designed to be stimulus. Instead, they're relief bills. They were designed to be short-term emergency bridge loans to individuals and to small businesses to help them get through the crisis. PPP is a perfect example where it's designed to be guaranteed low-interest loans to small businesses, those with 500 or fewer employees, to go to pay for salaries and business mortgage and rent and utilities. And if the money is spent for that amount of the loan is forgivable. And it was designed to keep as many employees as possible still in their jobs, still in their health care, still with a relationship with their employer, and to keep them connected. It has had significant success. And in fact, Texas has the highest rated participation of any state in the union in the PPP program. There has been some uncertainty in terms of which companies can participate and under what terms. And I understand some of the frustration. It's worth noting that some of that uncertainty is inherent in any massive program being stood up this quickly. Look, the Small Business Administration, their total budget this year was $23 billion. We just sent $700 billion through them. The volume is such that they're overwhelmed. They weren't designed to be a $700 billion program. They were designed to be a $23 billion program. That is an order of magnitude greater. So certainly as Congress envisioned this was for real small businesses. This was for restaurants. This was for bars. This was for hotels. This was for oil field services companies. This was for real small businesses that are facing real consequences and harms from this crisis. To the extent you've seen large, wealthy public firms participating, I think there has understandably been a public outcry. Some have decided, so Shake Shack is a big company. Shake Shack initially participated, and then there was enough of a public outcry, they said, we'll give the money back. I think that probably made sense. Another example, my alma mater, Harvard University, participated not in PPP, but in another program for universities. Harvard has the largest endowment of any school on the face of the planet. And the idea that they wanted $9 million in taxpayer funds when they have $30-40 billion in their endowment was absurd. I spoke out loudly against that. And look, I get under the initial terms of the loan, they were entitled. They realized, okay, let's use some common sense. Let's not take the money. But it took a lot of public outcry to get Harvard to back off. What I'd say is, if you don't need the money, don't take it. And use some common sense in this. Those who are, the Aspen Ideas Festival, which has, I think, $180 million in their endowment and has billionaires filling its board, they put in for money. Well, frankly, if you've got a whole bunch of billionaires and you've got over $100 million in your endowment, maybe you shouldn't go to the taxpayers and ask for funds. If you're running a local restaurant and all your workers have left, then yes, you should. So the program was designed to help real small businesses. And I would just say, folks ought to use some common sense in terms of working under it.
There's a follow-up question on the PPP interim rule for forgiveness. There is other expenses, and there's the mention of transportation as part of other expenses, but not really a definition. So this individual wants to know if the following under transportation could be included for forgiveness. So car allowance, mileage reimbursement, gas, vehicle maintenance, tolls, and parking expenses.
So I'll tell you what, I don't know the specific answer to that, but what I'm going to do is my staff is on this call as well. I'm going to ask my staff to follow up with you guys. If you would give them the name of the person who asked that question, we'll follow up directly with them and try to do our best to track down the answer and get the answer. I don't want to just wing it and give the wrong answer. So we'll follow up and try and get that to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Senator. Well, we're coming up. We like to keep these 30 minutes or so. Really appreciate your time. A lot of people don't know, if you're not sort of in the Chamber of Commerce industry, that you've really been fighting hard for individuals and organizations like ourselves. As you've got first line responders on the medical side, and then there's first line responders on the economic side. And with this crisis going on, we appreciate your support of Chambers of Commerce. So thank you so much for that.
Well, absolutely. And let me say, I have been advocating that Chambers of Commerce, that C6 organizations be eligible for PPP funds. I actually called the Secretary of Treasury, Stephen Mnuchin, who is a close friend, and made the case directly to him that what chambers are doing, what Hispanic chambers are doing on the ground, makes a real difference in terms of helping small businesses navigate through this insanity that we're in. I've also introduced legislation to clarify that the chamber should qualify. So I'm going to continue fighting for that because I think that's important. Let me just make 2 points closing up. Number one, I want to say to everyone on this call, thank you. Thank you for the incredible work you're doing. Thank you for the difference you're making with your employees. Thank you for the difference you're making with your family, with your community. These are hard and challenging times, and it always makes a difference, but especially now in a time of crisis. And the second thing I want to say is just a word of encouragement. We're going to make it through this. Texans are strong and resilient. Americans are strong and resilient. We have made it through enormous challenges before. We've made it through 2 world wars. We made it through the Great Depression. We made it through 9/11. We've made it through global pandemics before. We will make it through this as well, and we'll do it the way we always have, by coming together, standing united, standing strong. And I have every confidence that Texas and America will do that. And so I just want to say to each of you, thank you for everything you're doing to help us come through these enormous crises.
Great words. Thank you, Senator Ted Cruz, for your time today, being able to address this group here. We appreciate all the hard work that you continue to do representing us here in Fort Worth and the great state of Texas. So I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. For our leaders online, we'll have a full slate of programs next week that we'll get back out. But for now, have a good rest of the afternoon, and thanks again.